My dad had a very strong passion for cars and sports in general, but like cars was his big thing, right? And so we had a connection over that. He was our coach in all our sports, like always taking us around like drives and doing like fun little activities like that. My dad worked at Cantor Fitzgerald in the World Trade Center on the 105th floor of at the North Tower. I had been in that office so many times. I had been in his office specifically. I had been at the Windows on the World restaurant, which was on the 106th and 107th floor, so 2 stories above his office. So I had just started fourth grade, and I just remember how beautiful that morning really was. And there was not a single cloud in the sky, and the pilots actually referred to that the sky that morning as severe clear because there was zero clouds in the sky. So that's why when the first plane hit my dad's building, everyone was under the impression it was an accident, because how could there have been a plane flying so low in downtown in lower Manhattan, right? There was reports often of planes, when they were landing in Newark, or even like going to Queens at JFK. And so I'm in my fourth grade classroom, and at about 9 a.m, my superintendent of my school walks up to the door of my classroom, and there was a little glass panel in the wooden door, and he knocks on that, and he makes eye contact with my teacher, and he walks inside. And typically when he would come into a classroom, you would suspect that someone was in trouble, because he was a nice guy, but you just would never come into the class and just be like talking to people. He was the superintendent of the whole school. And he whispers something to my teacher, and she points at myself and another classmate and tells us to go into the hallway. And as we begin to get up and walk into the hallway, I'm thinking, like I said, like I was in trouble, and I didn't know what I did. And my teacher is following me into the hall, and he whispers something to her prior to her following us. I then walk into the hallway, and I see my brother Nick, who was 7. And that classmate's younger brother is standing there too. Their teachers seem to know a little bit more information. There they huddle us 4 boys, and the 2 teachers are whispering, and then they tell us, like, a plane hit your dad's building. Your dads are safe. They're evacuating the tower. There's nothing to worry about. And those other kids' dad was safe. He worked on the 33rd floor. My teachers had no idea where any of our dads worked. So they brought us to this room that we all dubbed the computer room, because it was like we'd walk in there during the end of the school year leading into summer break, and we'd play computer games like Gizmos and Gadgets and all those types of games. I remember playing that game for what seemed like hours. What I vividly remember is the parents running through the halls to pick up their kids because everyone was so afraid. My school, where I grew up and where I went to middle school, was not a big school. You're seeing parents run into the hallways and they're crying. It's not something you often see. And I just couldn't understand why I was staying in school for the rest of the day while these kids are getting taken out. And so later on that day, I get home from school at 3 p.m. My brother Nick and I get on the bus. We're the only 2 kids on the bus. When we get dropped off at the bottom of the hill, we start walking up the hill to where our house was. And when we walked up and approached the house, I saw probably 40 cars roughly parked in the driveway and on the lawn in these weird odd angles, and it just seemed like everyone had rushed over to the house and just pulled into the parking areas and like in the driveway and just ran into the house. There was no organization. When I walked inside the house and I started walking through where the kitchen was, so when I turned to my left and I see a bunch of family members and family friends huddled in the corner crying. People had cell phones, and they were calling hospitals, I found out, and hotlines, and like trying to see if anyone had heard from my dad. There were these websites that were established, or these portals, where people were posting like, floor 102, floor 105, and naming names. Has anyone heard from this person? Please call this number. That's the type of misinformation we had, right? Because not everyone had a cell phone back then either. But everyone in this house in that moment, had a cell phone, strangely enough. I keep walking into the room that we, as a family, called the TV room. And when I walked in there, I saw the footage for the first time, and I watched it all occurring as it was, fresh to me. And I see my dad's building on fire. At that point in the day, they did not have the footage from the first plane hitting the first building. I see the second plane hit the second tower. And then I see the buildings coming down. And when the buildings come down on this replay, the woman in the room who had the remote changes the channel. Now she does, it changes to another news station showing more images, more graphic images. She was trying to shut it off. When she changes that channel, it goes to a news station that's showing an image of someone falling to their death. And I see that, and I instantaneously lock into that, and I'm watching this happen, and I couldn't understand what I was seeing. That to me was just the most impactful part of the footage, because I had been in that building. And I just saw where these people were falling from. And I couldn't pinpoint exactly where they were, obviously, as a child. But you just see a person falling in the air, 1,300 feet in the air. And you just, as a child too, you just don't understand what you're seeing. That caused a visceral reaction out of me. And that's what caused my grandmother to basically usher me out of the house and say, go play with your friends and, come back later or whatever. And I went in the backyard, ran across to my neighbor's house and played. And that's what I remember from that day. And the days that followed, there was a lot of confusion still, and it was revolving around me calling my dad's cell phone and leaving voicemails on his phone. But here's what I found out in those days that followed. My dad slept in. He had a morning workout that he would always go to, and for him, a morning workout meant he was working out at 5:30 in the morning. So for him to sleep in late and miss that morning workout didn't really mean much. It meant he was getting into the office at 6:37 in the morning. He would drive to Journal Square, and he would take the path over from Journal Square to the World Trade Center. And when he would get to the World Trade Center, he would take the escalator up to the main lobby and then take that elevator up to the 105th floor. He got to his desk, started his normal thing with calling his clients, checking in before the markets opened, and at 8:46 in the morning, so about 45 minutes before the markets open, the plane hits, and he's on the phone with a client, and the line cuts off. And I actually, ironically, was just talking with that former client today. Line cuts off. They're on what's called a squawk box. So there's a whole box, and my dad was a broker. So my dad would pick which bank or which hedge fund or which firm he wanted to call, and he'd click into each one. And so when that line cut off, that he happened to be on the phone with his friend, no one on the other side and on their squawk box could get through to my dad again, or anyone on my dad's desk. So the lines were cut off, and 3 minutes later, my dad made his first phone call to my mom at 8:49 in the morning. My mom picks up the phone and sees his cell phone coming through on the caller ID, and she's thinking he walked out because he had voiced that he was going to walk out, quit. He was unhappy. He never would call her during the workday. She thought that that was the moment, right? Picks up the phone, and again, my dad being the prankster, he says, "Michelle, we think a small plane hit the building. We're evacuating the tower. We're trying to evacuate. I'm okay. Do you have the TV on?" And as he finishes that sentence, my mom proceeds to follow up with, "John, this better not be some sort of sick joke." As she finishes that sentence, the line cuts off. And she was breastfeeding my baby brother, who was 3 months old. She puts him down. She grabs the remote, changes the channel on the TV. And this had just occurred. So they were just starting to show what was happening. And as she changes the channel, it goes to whatever news station she happened to hit. And she sees the smoke coming out of my dad's building. Frantically starts freaking out. The two of them are calling each other back and forth, back and forth. And so my dad would call my mom, and my mom would pick up if he got through, and she'd hear nothing but static. And then the same thing would happen when my mom would call, and the lines were dropping and cutting off. And then finally my dad got through to my mom one last time and basically said goodbye. He calmly said, "Michelle, I don't know if you can hear me. You're the love of my life, and I love you forever." And my mom started screaming, "I love you," and then the line cut off. And that was the last time she spoke to him. I started collecting stories from a lot of the guys on my dad's desk, some of which were young. One guy that I looked up to very much so as a child, and he was only 23 years old. He had just gotten promoted the day before fully to the desk. He called his parents and had to abruptly hang up the phone and say, "I got to go." And I think that they were passing around the cell phone. It could have been my dad's. I have no idea. And my dad's brother, my uncle, he heard what was going on, and he ran upstairs to the kitchen where my dad grew up in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and my uncle was still living at home. He saw the footage, and he knew immediately that my dad was not going to get out. He started calling my dad's cell phone for what he said felt like, minutes. And he said he probably called 50 times. It just wouldn't ring. And then finally it started ringing. And this to me is just a true testament to who my dad was as a person. He was a man of faith, and I think even in his final moments, but my uncle said that he picked up that phone call like it was any other normal day. Like they were going to meet for lunch, like they always had done down there. And my dad just said hello. And my uncle said, John, get out. And my dad just said, "Tony, I love you." And the line cut off. And that was the last person that we know of that spoke to him. I think that call happened at about 9, shortly after 9 in the morning. When I found out all this information, I struggled because I just wanted to fill in that gap. From like 9 in the morning roughly to 10:28 in the morning, an hour and a half of terror. What did he go through? And that was what I wanted to know. Like, was he standing on a windowsill on the 105th floor, waiting for someone to rescue him for, an hour and a half, for 90 minutes? Was he in the staircase trying to figure out how to get out? Like, were they trying to move things around because the stairs were blocked? These are all the things that were going on in my mind, and I just couldn't understand it. I said this recently on a TV thing I did. I said, for me, at least, the biggest challenge I had was, a parent dies, let's say from an illness or old age or something along those lines. You have that ability to say goodbye. You have that final moment. Most times, maybe not every time, but a lot of the times you have that final goodbye. And with 9/11 and the way my dad died, you see it. The whole world sees it. You see a plane hit a building, you know that someone died just then and there. But when you look at the footage that, started to come out in the years that followed, and even in the days where people are just huddled outside of those windows. I mean, if anyone had been in the World Trade Center back then, they know that those people had to be so desperate to do that, because no one in their right mind would ever stand on a windowsill stacked with 4, 5, 10 other people on top of each other, so desperate for air. And so as a result, I just pictured my father in that. And I couldn't, it bothered me so much. And most importantly, like what I was saying recently on that TV interview was like, you just don't know what's going on inside of there. That's the closest connection we have to the remaining human life that's alive, if that makes sense. The biggest reason why I was so fascinated about what could have happened. Did he jump? Did he fall? Was he in the staircase? Like all the things that were unknown to me. I think that's why I was so consumed with that. You see it, but you just, at the same time, you don't see it, if that makes sense. And so that started with me turning to my mom and to my uncle, my dad's brother, and asking them what they thought happened, asking them what they could hear on those 10-second phone calls, 20-second phone calls. And so the insanity of my questions was very apparent to everyone, right? And this is like the definition of addiction and alcoholism, right? Like do something over and over again, hoping for a different result. And that was me. I was asking the same questions over and over again, hoping for a different answer. I asked them if they thought my dad jumped or fell or something along those lines. And they would tell me no every single time. And I just couldn't understand why they would tell me no, other than like, maybe that's what my mind was thinking. That's what they hoped, that wasn't what happened to him. My mom didn't tell me about the fact that the medical examiner called her and that they did this analysis of my dad's body when they found him and all this stuff. And I mean, she did say it to other people and I overheard it, but I also thought it was a convenient excuse. And so I was like, oh, they're just trying to sugarcoat this for the kids, me and my brothers and whatnot, right? And so that's what happened. I pivoted like my questions to another person in my life who was an uncle through marriage, and he found out about this obsession of mine that like was consuming my life. Every day I'd come home from school, I would search the same things over and over again. 9/11 people jumping, 9/11 people hanging out of the windows, and thinking to myself, if I found that photo that potentially resembled my father, it would give me peace and closure. I know now as I look back that never would have given me peace and closure anyway, but that's what I was so obsessed with trying to figure out. And so this uncle tells me everything that he thought, and at the time, what I did want to hear, because I thought that I was being withheld the truth. And so he says to me, look, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, talk to me about it. And I asked him if he thought my father jumped, and he told me, yeah. And without any hesitation, he's like, yeah, your dad jumped. Found out years later, obviously it was a lie, but in that moment, we were driving, and he had leaned over as he was driving the car and he had assaulted me, and I am looking down and I'm realizing that he's assaulting me, and I'm not even processing it really full, because I was looking out the window and I'm thinking to myself, this guy has now told me like my dad jumped. Like finally someone's telling me the truth. Now that I know the truth, I'll find him in one of these photos, and then when I find him, I'll have my peace and my closure. I would go on to get abused by that uncle for 1 year. It completely, obviously, disrupted my life, my childhood, my adolescence. Any remaining chance I had at being a relatively normal kid was completely thrown out the window at that point. I was just so lost. At that point, I already had been smoking and drinking, and I wasn't an alcoholic, like fully. Like my alcoholism and addiction had not fully reached its potential at that point in time. But I was numbing the pain, for sure. The recreational smoker that I used to be on the weekends with my friends, yeah, it was becoming more of a daily habit, but it wasn't fully taking over my life. And then I graduated from high school and I get into college, and then I'm immersed into drugs that I had never even heard of, and everything started to change at that point. I said it was an uncle through marriage, not my dad's brother, so it was a different uncle. My mom and my dad's brother were the only two people I was going to with my questions for the longest time. They could no longer bear to hear the questions anymore. It was just too powerful for them. It was too emotional for them. Obviously, they were grieving themselves. My uncle was 23 years old. My dad died, right? So for him, he was 15 years older than me. He was 15 years younger than my father. So I looked at him as like an older brother that I never had. Even for him, as he was going through his own grief, he said, look, you can't do this to yourself anymore. Like you're 14 years old. You're going to torment your life. You're going to ruin your life. And you're not moving on from your dad's death in a healthy way. Your dad would not want this for you. He'd want you to be living your life and remember the life that he lived, not how he died. It took me a long, long time and years of trauma and processing everything to be able to finally do that, right? Remember him for the life that he lived. But we'll get to that. So at that point, that uncle, my dad's brother, cuts off the communications. He doesn't want to do it anymore. My mom, same type of thing. She's like, we can't talk about this anymore. And that's when that uncle through marriage steps into my life and basically he was the only one who would talk to me about it and used it as his way. And I often describe it as his sword to cut down any last vulnerability, any last shield that I had, because I was completely vulnerable. And Once he did that, it was, it was game over for me. I was a relatively recreational smoker, drinker. When I get to college, my freshman year, I'm introduced, and I should be on a medication like that, but I can't take it because I'm sober. But at that time, for years, I had been against the doctor's orders of wanting me to be on those medications because I heard what my brothers said. My brothers would talk about how it would make them feel weird. I said, look, I don't want to take this stuff because, they're saying how bad it makes them feel. And so I said, no, I'm good. And I also had straight A's. I don't know if I mentioned that before. I was a straight A student. So I didn't think I needed ADHD medication. My biggest problem was that I'd go into a classroom and I'd distract everyone by tapping on my desk or whistling. My ADHD was full-blown ADHD, not as much like, when push came to shove and I had to do homework and all that, I'd get it done. But in any event, my freshman year of college, I get introduced. And when I snort my first, it was game over. I mean, I was like, this stuff is amazing. Why doesn't everyone do this? And the kid who sold it to me was like, it's college, everyone does. And so I was popping them and then snorting them. And the problem for someone like me is when you have ADHD and you're taking a medication that you actually need, eventually it's going to work and it's no longer going to give you a high. And it stopped. I was increasing my dosages too. And it just wasn't giving me any euphoric high. I go home that summer and I get prescribed from my doctor and who wanted me on it before. When I get back to college my sophomore year, I'm like, this stuff's just not for me. I'm taking it every day. It's not doing anything. I'm not getting high. I'm just feeling normal. And that's the point, obviously, is to feel normal. So instead I start selling it, and then I'm sitting in my dorm room one night and I'm 19 years old. My friend walks into my dorm room and has this little baggie of baby blue pills. And I look at him and I make eye contact with him and I say, what are those? And he's like, they're called, have you ever heard of them? I said, no. He's like, they're painkillers and they feel like you're stoned, but better. I was like, sign me up. That's it. And as I snort that 15 milligrams on that dorm room desk, everything in my life just shifted, because for the first time ever at 19 years old, the pain that I had carried with me for 10 years at that point was gone. I was able to shut off all the noise in my head. I was able to no longer be that child of 9/11 that I felt like I was constantly labeled. As that high went away and dissipated, I knew, I'm like, this is it. This is the feeling I'm going to chase forever. And I don't talk about this as often. The whole entire thing when it comes to addiction, it's by the grace of God that I'm still alive. I didn't put everything that I actually did or went through in the book, and it wasn't for being shameful. I talk very openly about it. I talk openly about it when I speak at a school, when I do an interview of any sorts. This is who I am. I have nothing to hide. I am not embarrassed by any of it. And I had been addicted to opiates at that point for years. But that different type of high in administration, I knew I was going to chase it. And I called him up, this friend of mine who did that to me. And I said, where do I get needles from? And he tells me, go to the pharmacy and ask syringes. So I went to the CVS that my family had been filling prescriptions for years. And I didn't know that CVS is the only pharmacy in the country that you cannot walk into and buy or any needles or syringes over the counter. You need a prescription. So I'm so strung out, and I walk in there and I walk up to the pharmacist, who knows my entire family, by the way, and I ask him for syringes, and I lie to him and tell him that they're from my brother, who's diabetic, and he knows my brothers. And he was like, you got to come back with the prescription. I can't just sell these to you. That gentleman, my mom ran into him a few years ago, and he remembered that story. And literally she said to him, you saved his life. And because I'll tell you, if I had gotten the needles that day, there's a really good chance I wouldn't be here. And I got sober a few months later. I truly believe that if I got those needles that day, it was truly game over for me. I had been institutionalized twice at that point. I've been in and out of detox. The next part was jails, and I got arrested in November of 2014, charged with 3 felonies, possession of narcotics, Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, and intent to distribute those narcotics. I got a good lawyer, but the lawyer said to me, look, man, you're not getting off by paying a fine. This is going to take some work on your end, and that work is going to require you to get sober. I was able to manipulate my way for a little bit out of getting sober. And all it did was buy me another 6 to 9 months, maybe. But I hit the jails part, right? I was going to jail, and I'll get to this in a sec. But then the last part was death, right? That's all I knew was there for me. What got me sober was what I call a spiritual experience. And without that, I wouldn't be sober today. But I was facing jail time. I went to meet with my lawyer before I had my court sentencing. And he told me, look, like, they might give you probation. If they give you probation, you are the luckiest man that ever walked. Because you should be going to drug court, which in New Jersey at the time was the most severe form of drug punishment. The way they would work it was they would try to do another thing called conditional discharge, which you only get once. So if you're a repeat offender and you get conditional discharge and you don't stay sober, you're done. You get caught up again, you get arrested again, there's no going back. I go to my court hearing, I get put on probation for 1 year. And I leave that court hearing, I leave that sentencing, and my lawyer tells me, you won the lottery, right? You got to stay sober. And he's looking at me and he's like, go get sober, because he knew I wasn't sober in that moment. And he said, look, they're going to give you 2 drug tests. And the first one's going to come in the first 6 months. And if you pass it, you might not be drug tested again. The second one will come in the next, obviously, 6 months of that year. But if you pass the first drug test, they might not drug test you in that second 6 months. I have at this point about a month and a half time to get sober. I don't get sober. And leading up to that drug test, I call him a friend. He was a drug dealer who I asked, hey, what do you do? Because I know you're not sober. I'm like, what do you do for your drug test? And he's like, well, they give me a mouth swab test. And I go in and I drink this detox mouthwash and they swab my saliva and they put it in the vial. And on paper, it shows that I'm clean and sober when I'm not. And I go in for that drug test on that day in July. And I'm sitting in the parking lot first and I get high and I start drinking the mouthwash. And I'm looking at my watch and I'm seeing the clean saliva time tick down. And finally they call me in. And when I walk inside my probation officer's office and I sit down, on her keyboard, I see the mouth swab in the packaging on the top of the keyboard. A light bulb lights up in my mind and I'm like, this is it. Like, this is the easiest con I'm ever going to pull off. She starts having me sign these papers and she's shuffling through the papers after I sign them all. And she says, look, you admit that if you fail this drug test, we can send you to jail right now from here. I said, yep. Okay. She looks up when we make eye contact and she looks back down and looks back up when we make eye contact. And she's like, are you sure you're going to pass this drug test today? I was like, yeah, I'm going to pass. She bends down, she grabs a cup and she goes, go pee in this cup. And my heart sinks because that fake urine that was supposed to be strapped to my leg, I left it back at home. And I walk inside the bathroom and the gentleman who walks in there with me is supposed to watch me through an angled mirror. And as I'm peeing into the cup, I look to my left and I see him looking the other way. And I'm like, I could have gotten away with it, you know? And so I walk back in and she's holding up my cup and she's like, you had 2 months notice of this drug test. Like, I don't know if this is a cry for help or you genuinely can't stop. And I said, no, like, I do want to stop. And she says, okay, I'm going to give you one last chance. You come back in 1 month and you're clean and sober, I will drop your charges. Every single one of them. If you come back in a month and you fail, I will send you to jail that day. And when I get back home, I'm pacing back and forth trying to figure out what to do. Go back in 1 month with the fake urine. This time bring the detox mouthwash, and this time bring the fake urine. Or maybe I just surrender and say, you know what, I need some help, and go to rehab, go to detox, truly get some help, and try to see what's going on, like, and how I can actually better my life, you know. And I have this spiritual experience. I walk out in the backyard and I spark up that. And as I do, I look up in that sky. And as I talked about that severe clear sky in September 11, 2001, well, I look up in that sky and it is so crystal clear blue. And I start crying. And I said, Dad, please give me a sign. I need some help. Lo and behold, on September 12th, my mom was told to look for the signs. And that night, a fly landed on her nightstand. And that was her sign that my dad wasn't coming home. And so that fly stayed in our house for about 6 months after 9/11. And throughout those years, and at that point, I'd been 14 years, I would often get visits from that fly, you know? And on that sunny day in July 2015, I'm leaning on this railing, I'm smoking this, and this fly lands on the railing and it just starts looking at me and spinning around in a circle and stopping and looking at me. And I'm hysterically crying because as I'm watching this fly, I'm swatting at it with my hand and it won't go away. I pull out my phone and I record it and I said, you know what? Enough's enough. I walk inside my house and I said, that's it. I'm done. I called up a detox and I said, I'm not sober right now. I need a bed tonight. And they said, we can't get you in until Friday. I said, okay, fine, book it. I want that bed. And 2 days later, I checked myself into that detox. That was July 24, 2015. By the grace of God and a lot of other things, a program that I'm a part of, I've been sober 1 day at a time since that day. I just celebrated 9 years of sobriety. It's a blessing because, you know, we talk in the rooms of this program being a program not for people who want it and people who need it, but for people who work it. And I was faced with that challenge because I wanted sobriety and I needed it desperately. When I got sober, I was faced with opportunities where I needed to come forward about the things that I went through as a way to grow and heal, and also as a means to protecting people close to me that I love. And that required me coming forward about being abused, and something I never imagined doing. I ended up coming forward about that, and that same uncle through marriage, was facing 20 years in federal prison after I got him on a recorded line and essentially admitting to everything that he did. He was pled out, and they sentenced him to 7 years. He served 4 of the 7 years. And I stood up for what's right, and I spoke up. And that's what the moral of my story is about, right? It's overcoming trauma, it's overcoming adversities, but it's speaking up when you don't want to speak up, when you think no one's going to believe you, you know? And so for someone who needs sobriety, first of all, if they are thinking about sobriety, they more likely than not need it. And there's a way out. And the freedom I have today is just, it's indescribable. I started writing my memoir when I was a year sober. So I'm grateful that I started writing everything down when I did, because I don't think I would have been able to tell as accurate of a story. I started writing my book at a year sober. I finished it in May 2017. I rewrote it about 4 to 5 times at least, and it got published in September of 2020. And my book, Sway, is the first story told by a child of 9/11. I started speaking to high schools at 9 months sober, but it was different. It was to remove the stigma of addiction. It was to raise awareness for addiction and let people know there's, ways to get help. And when the book came out, I started getting requests to speak at schools, and I didn't really, think much of it. But then I started doing it, and I was like, wow, it was the most fulfilling thing I ever did. I had kids speaking up about things they had gone through, and that's when I knew that this was my mission. This was my path, my passion. I was in and out of finance jobs, trying to live a life like my dad, like trying to keep his legacy alive. And I was miserable. And my dad was miserable. And I took that lesson from his death and I've applied it to my life. I am the most fulfilled I've ever been today doing what I do. Yeah, my advice would be you got to trust in someone, confide in someone that you trust. And so I often encourage people to speak up about it, because I'll tell you, the growth and transformation I've seen as a person is unbelievable. I wouldn't be sober today, I'll tell you that much, if I had never spoken up. So I'm 32 years old now. I'm sober over 9 years. My relationship with my mom and my brothers is unbelievable. I'm engaged to be married in December. Life isn't perfect. It's never going to be perfect. I'll tell you, it's a lot better than what it used to be. And I have a lot to be grateful for, and I am.